How's it going, Starseekers? My name's Luke, and welcome back once more to the channel, where in today's indie game review, we're going to be taking a look at a game called A Long Way Down. It's a roguelite deck builder with RPG elements, which not only sees you building your deck to fight against the many horrors that the sinister dungeon master throws at you, but also building your route through the dungeon as you place tiles to create walkways, tactically steering your character towards treasures and away from enemies. Now, I've played a few deck builders last year, all of which were pretty good, but how does A Long Way Down hold up against these, and do its unique dungeon building mechanics help it to stand out from the crowd? In this review, I hope to answer these questions, so don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to support the channel and enjoy the content, and let's get into it. Now, A Long Way Down's story focuses on a character called Sam, who from what I can gather is some sort of shaman who used to cleanse dark spirits in the living world. Now, it just so happens that Sam has now died, and his soul has found its way into Limbo, which houses these spirits, and also a dungeon keeper looking to exact revenge on him. Guided by his friend Marbri, who is conducting Sam's funeral rites, he must then fight his way through Limbo using the same deck of cards he used whilst alive, but the dungeon keeper is there to see that he never makes it through Limbo or onto the afterlife. So I'll start by saying that A Long Way Down is not a complex game in comparison to some deck builders, so if you usually avoid these type of games due to the depth of the gameplay mechanics, then this game might be something to cut your teeth on. The main menu has a gameplay guide which contains a bunch of general hints and tips, but the main guide can be found in-game, and you're actually walked through most of this upon entering your first dungeon. Now, gameplay in A Long Way Down is made up of two phases: the dungeon traversing phase, in which you obtain piles of tiles and place them to bridge gaps in the fragmented dungeon, and the combat phase, which occurs whenever you encounter an enemy. Each of these phases sees you using up action points represented by yellow diamonds, and after using all of your action points, it's then the enemy's turn to make a move. Starting with the dungeon phase, each time you begin a floor you'll be given a primary objective to complete, which usually involves you defeating a set number of monsters, or in some levels a larger boss type monster. Completing this objective rewards you with cards, equipment and powder, which we'll get onto shortly, and it also allows you to leave the level and move deeper into Limbo. Now, you usually won't want to progress straight to the next level, as each floor has a number of secondary objectives from which you can earn extra loot, and they also contain things like chests and sarcophagi from which you can snag extra items. Getting to these things can be rather tricky though, as many floor tiles come with walls which don't always allow you to build straight paths to the loot, though there are a number of special tiles which allow you to destroy walls, nuisance floor tiles, or rotate tiles in a particular direction. Now, the dungeon master can also make things hard for you, as each time your action points are all spent and your turn's over, in addition to enemy movement, he will steal one of your tiles and place it wherever he sees fit, and while this often just appears to be randomly placed with no real thought behind it, on occasions he can screw you over by placing tiles to block your path or by opening up routes for enemies to get to you. Now, while inside dungeons, the loot that you obtain is stored within your backpack, and if you happen to die within a level, the loot that you're carrying will then be lost, and it will only actually be safe once you complete a level and return to the hub area which sits between levels. It's also worth noting that you can't just switch out your equipment or cards whenever you choose, and instead you must use the armory within the hub or move to an armory tile within the dungeon, and I personally found this particular mechanic a little bit annoying, as I wasn't able to quickly switch out equipment or decks to deal with different enemy types. Overall, I thought the dungeon building aspect of the game was pretty interesting, but I did find that it really slowed down the pace of the game. Scrolling through your selection of tiles and then placing them was a slow process due to there being a noticeable delay between each registered button press, and I found that having your movement interjected every 3 moves while the dungeon master stole and placed a tile that you really needed, or having your buddy Marbury popping in frequently for a chat did become a little tiresome. So moving on now to the game's combat system, across the bottom of the screen you'll find the cards which you can play this turn, and these are comprised of the equipment that you were in and the deck that you've built. The first of these is your weapon card, which acts as your standard attack and can be used as many times as you like. In addition to boosting your character's health, defense and attack stats, each piece of equipment also comes with its own card, and this second card is actually a stack of those equipment cards. The final set of cards are drawn from your deck on the left side of the screen, and you can have up to 15 cards in your deck, which including your weapon and equipment cards gives you a total of 20. Now each round of combat sees you activating these cards, and each of them comes with its own action point cost indicated by a number within the purple diamond on the cards themselves. Each card can be either used on your enemy or your own team members, and they can affect single or multiple targets, and cards which target enemies include ones which deal damage, debuff their attack and defense stats or cause damage over time, while team targeting cards can be used to heal your teammates, boost your attack and defense stats, or buff things like your critical strike chance. Overall, I thought there was some good variety to cards which allowed for a number of different builds, but things are still kept quite simplistic in terms of battle mechanics, and I usually like my deck builders with a little more strategy. Now each turn in combat sees you spending your action points to play your cards, and when you have additional partners in your team which can be recruited by finding them in dungeons, your action points are actually shared amongst the team. After using all of your action points, it's then the monster's turn to perform their actions, and this process continues until either your team is defeated or you kill all of the monsters, at which point you're rewarded with some items and you continue on through the dungeon. Now one thing that I found a little troubling about the card system was that although you can equip each team member with weapons and armour, which does grant a few additional cards, you can only ever have 15 cards in your deck, and both these and equipment cards can only be used once per battle. When encountering fights against multiple enemies or bosses, I often ran out of cards before the fight was over, and while you are able to recycle your deck, placing all of the cards back into your draw pile, this costs a hefty chunk of health, and there's also no way to escape from fights. Now I thought there was some decent variety to the game's enemies, with each enemy having their own kinds of attacks, though I did find that fighting the same enemies over and over when rerunning dungeons did get a little boring. Every few dungeon levels you also get to face off against a boss which tend to have more complex attack mechanics when compared to standard enemies, but again things are kept pretty simple and you shouldn't really struggle to defeat these providing your equipment and deck are up to scratch. Now this being a roguelite game, it's essentially built on repetition, and in order to avoid running out of cards, you actually need to upgrade your cards, and this is emphasised by the difficulty spike which comes just after defeating the first boss and entering the second dungeon. In order to upgrade your cards and equipment, you're going to have to do plenty of reruns of previous dungeons, collecting dust from dead enemies or from within chests, or by breaking down spare cards and equipment. Dust can also be used to craft new cards once you find the recipes, but this usually requires you to sacrifice other cards in addition to the dust cost. Now overall I thought that A Long Way Down was a decent deck builder, but as with the dungeon phase, the combat phase also suffers from input delays when selecting cards, and this just made the game feel much slower than it needed to be. The same can be said of the in-game character menu, which is also poorly laid out, and when swapping out cards or equipment, your cursor always jumps back to the first item in your inventory, making adjustments to your deck an arduous process. After collecting a large number of cards, I also found that I couldn't just move down through them, and instead I had to navigate to this scroll bar and then move it down to scroll through them, which also became pretty irritating. Now gameplay wise, I thought the developer did a good job. While things are kept simple, there's still plenty of strategy involved in building your deck and battling monsters, and I feel that the game will prove more accessible to a casual audience. When it comes to visuals, I really like the art direction in this one. I thought that the enemy and character designs were good and I enjoyed the game's cutscenes, but navigating through dungeons, I did experience a little slowdown with the game's frame rate. On the audio side of things, the game's sound effects and ambient dungeon sounds were all pretty decent, and while the music generally consists of your standard fantasy type tunes, it does serve its purpose just fine. Now when it comes to my own personal rating of the game, I'm going to be giving A Long Way Down 3 out of 5 stars. A Long Way Down is a good little deck building roguelite, and while I found faster paced games like Neoverse or Dungeon Top were more to my liking, if you're looking to get started in the genre or for a more casual deck builder, then it's well worth a play. You can get A Long Way Down from the UK Switch eShop, where it's usually priced at £13.49, or from the US eShop, where it's usually priced at $14.99. Alternatively, the game's also available on Steam. And that's just about it for this Nintendo Switch review of A Long Way Down. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed it and it helped you out. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on it and the game in the comment section below. And if you like the content, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, as I upload new Nintendo Switch reviews and content every few days. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.